Hello, and welcome to another short box from Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I am Zeckthar, and this week we will be discussing a minor character from the history of the Eldari, or should I say the Eldar. Yes, that strange race that has been around since the Old One's defeat, and whose lust and desecration cost them everything. While the destruction of the race is very important to the lore of the Milky Way, remember, this is a short vox. While I do not have the time to get into the rise and fall of the Eldar, we can talk about some of their minor heroes that are fairly important to history. Now, as I just said, we don't have time to go through the rise and fall of the Eldari, but one thing, and one thing alone, led to their fall. That was their pride. Yes, it was the pride of being so much better than any of the putrid filth that crossed their path. The only thing in all space that garnered problems for them was the Necrons, and they had simply vanished, leaving the Eldar as the only sentient life in the galaxy worth note. Sure, they had a little trouble with the orcs, those vile greenskins descended from the Krogs. That was nothing to the mighty empire of the Eldar. To give you a small example of such hubris, I give you Farseer Eldroth Starbane.
Now you may wonder what a Farseer is, and, well, I'll go ahead and tell you. Farseer is the most potent and respected form of Psyker or Seer. Council of the most powerful Farseers generally govern a craftworld. Farseers possess a wide diversity of psychic specialities, with divinations and precognizations being their most common skill. They are most often known for using their vast psychic powers to see the possibilities of the future so that they can manipulate events to better ensure the survival of the Eldari species in the wake of the fall. So now that you know what a Farseer is, what does that make of our hero? Well, let me explain. Eldorath Starbane is an Elder Farseer of the craftworld Imotekh, and because of his arrogance and pride, led his people into a disastrous defeat against the Necrons in the year of 798.M41. Let me set the stage for you. The world was named Samn'or. Eldorath's idea was an easy victory against the slowly awakening Imotekh dynasty of the Necrons. Yet he wasn't expecting Imotekh. Now, we have gone over Imotekh the Stormlord, the greatest strategist in all the galaxy, and it was this mighty warrior that Starbane had ignorantly decided to declare war on. Now, it wasn't all Eldorath's fault. He probably would have changed his tactics against such a mighty foe if he had known he'd join the fight, which he didn't, and as we know, pride goes before the fall. When Farseer Eldroth Starbane led his war host to the tomb world of Samn'or, he expected to face a Necron tomb disoriented from its long sleep of 60 million standard years in stasis. Yet such a simple battle was not to be. Imotekh the Stormlord and his campaign of reconquest ascendant after a series of pivotal victories against the Imperium of Man had come to Samn'or, seeking to bend its overlord to his will in the service of the Imotekh dynasty. The arrival of the Eldar sped the negotiation in Imotekh's favor. Kind of makes sense. For Samn'or could not stand against their ancient enemy alone. The Tomb World's stasis crypts had been ill-prepared for the Great Sleep, and many thousands of its Necron warriors had passed into dust. And those that had survived were rising slowly, yet fitfully. Because of this, Samnor's overlord, Zeron, had little hesitation in pledging allegiance to the growing Imotekh dynasty, for the alternative was to see his domain destroyed by Starbane's hands. With the pact sealed, Imotekh's priorities swiftly turned to battle, a battle that would be won through guile, as much as through forces of arms. Now, if Eldar had known he was facing off against the grand strategist of the Necrons, I honestly think he would have done things differently. But he didn't know, and, well, he didn't. So it was that when Eldorath Starbane led his advance force towards the caldera that concealed the tomb's entrance, he found it was held against him. Confident of victory, though, the Farseer launched his attack without waiting for the rest of his host, which was a mistake that would cost the Eldar dearly. For every advance the Eldar made, Imotekh had prepared a counter. Nowhere was this more clearly seen than when a wave serpent and its Viper Squadron escort split off from the main Eldar assault and drove hard towards the battle's heart, their goal to assail Imotekh directly. Yet Imotekh had expected such a move. Indeed, he had left certain sectors of his defense enticingly weak to provoke such an attempt. So it was that the Vipers closed into killing range. There was a blinding flash of emerald light, and then An immovable bulk of a monolith materialized between the Eldar and their prey. Unable to pull up in time, the lead Viper slammed full tilt into the slab-sided Necron war vessel, the resulting fireball leaving not so much as a scorch mark on the monolith's living metal hull. At every turn, Imotekh sought to deny the Eldar their most important tactical advantage, maneuverability. Death marks sniped jet bikers from their saddles. Flotillas of heavy destroyers positioned about the rim of the caldera targeted falcons and fire prisms with volley after volley of crackling gauze weapon fire, punching through holes and disabling anti-gravity units. By the time Starbane realized the severity of the threat he faced, his force was incapable of retreat and had no choice but to press on. Yet Imotech's countermeasures could only hold back the Eldar for so long. For every crippled Necron that reassembled itself and rejoined the firing line, another succumbed to critical damage and was whisked away by retrieval teleporters. Little by little, the Stormlord's forces wore thin. The monolith was destroyed in a bold assault by Fire Dragon aspect warriors, the death marks eliminated by Pathfinders, and the destroyers were scoured from their perch by Dark Reapers. Yet still the Eldar came. The main body of the host had arrived and were amassing for a second attack. Imotekh knew that his remaining forces could not hold against the new wave of attackers. But then again, he never planned on doing so. Those that know Imotekh, they know the Stormlord has a plan B, and C, and D, and even E for his battles. And normally they end with F, which signifies final defeat to his adversaries. With the arrogant Eldorath, he only needed to go with the second phase of his plan. Summoning angry storm clouds to cover his retreat, Imotekh unsealed the great stone entrance and led his dwindling army into the darkness of the tomb. Had Starbane been less arrogant, less certain of his superiority and that of his race, he might have recognized the trap for what it was and withdrawn, or better prepared for it. Yet the Farseer ordered the march into the cave's entrance. Long did the Eldar walk in darkness, through dusty vaults and chambers that had not been seen by the living for millions of Terran years. Yet they saw no enemies. The deeper Starbane progressed into the tomb without any contact, the more he grew convinced that the enemy had simply fled, escaping into the subterranean labyrinth in order to fight another day. Deeper and deeper into the tomb the Eldar went until, in a colossal vaulted chamber many miles beneath the surface, Imotekh sprung his trap. Without warning, quantum gravitic force fields flickered into life at the chamber's exits, sealing the Eldar within. As his forces turned their weapons on the force fields, Starbane could just make out a figure of Imotekh through the shimmering bearer of gravitic force, the impassive Pharaon standing mute and proud at the head of a phalanx of immortals. Starbane saw the Stormlord raise one clenched metallic fist in salute. Then the buzzing began. It started as a low drone that rumbled through the stone floor, rising in volume and intensity until it drowned out any other sound. As the noise reached fever pitch, swirling clouds of blood-red nanoscarabs burst from the concealed vents. They swarmed about the intruders, probing armor for any crack that would allow ingress, then burrowing into warm flesh beneath. Then, as soon as it had begun, the buzzing ceased, the swarms of nanoscarabs dissipating. The flagstones of the chamber were slick with Eldar blood, and the air thick with the screams of the wounded. But Starbane was grimly jubilant. The poor, arrogant fool. Imotech's trap had been sprung, but the Eldar had endured. The Farseer looked beyond the force field, a challenge in his eyes, as he met Imotech's gaze once again. In reply, the Stormlord tilted his head slightly to one side. Maybe a sign of respect? No. If Imotekh could show the facial expression of laughter, he would have done so, because that's when he truly started his trap. Remember, Imotech's plans are always in layers, and this is simply the second. With his third layer, the Flayed Ones attacked. Flayed Ones dropped out of the darkness, their mad voices keening with bloodlust, as the razor-sharp claws slashed and tore at the intruders. In the face of this new threat, the quantum shields were swiftly forgotten, the Eldar gathering into knots of warriors who fought back-to-back against their attackers. It was impossible to say how long the vile creatures had lurked in the shadows, clutching through the vaulted ceiling. Initially, the Flayed Ones wrought great carnage, isolating individual guardians and aspect warriors from their fellows and tearing them limb from shrieking limb. Yet as the Eldar resistance grew less panicked and the defensive ring grew ever tighter. The tide began to turn. The flayed ones attacked again and again, only to be hurled back by the disciplined shuriken fire of the guardians and aspect warriors, who fought shoulder to shoulder, back to back. The flayed ones attacked once, twice, thrice more, then warily circling their prey, searching for an opening. It was only when the flayed ones stalled their attack that Imotekh unleashed the final phase of his trap. With a gesture, the Stormlord negated the force field that stood before him, and ordered his undying minions into the fray. Immortals advanced, firing indiscriminately as they came, uncaring as to whether the shots hit Eldar or flayed ones. For their part, the flayed ones were able to escape the threat, twisting aside and melting into the shadows as swiftly as they had come. For the Eldar, gathered in a tight formation to better defend against melee attacks, the onslaught was devastating. Nearly half their number fell in the first volley, and those that had survived were so disoriented from their counterattack, did little to stay the implacable Necron advance. By the time Imotekh led a shield wall of his Lich Guard into the chamber, the outcome of the battle was no longer in doubt. Of all the Eldar warriors who had entered the tomb of Samn'or, only one survived to bring news of the defeat to the craftworld of Imotekh. Farseer Eldorath told of how Imotekh had spared him, whilst all other captives had swiftly been put to death. He told how the Stormlord had severed his right hand to serve as a humiliating reminder of his defeat, and then set him loose. Now one must wonder why the Stormlord did such a thing, and it's a fairly simple answer. Imotekh has the same problem as the Eldari when it comes to his hubris. The difference is Imotekh can back it up better, but mark my words, the Stormlord will face off against another grand strategist, one that even might be better than him. And that will be a day of reckoning. Well, what became of Eldorath? Well, he continued on as a Farseer, and once again fought against the Necron. Yet it went as well as it did against the Stormlord, unfortunately. Eldorath faced off against Oricon the Diviner, Enrakir the Traveler, and our favorite historian, Trazeen the Infinite. He fought to hold the tomb world of Karnak, and after years of struggle lost to these mighty Necron heroes. Yet it was through no fault of his own. Eldorath had remembered his fight with the Stormlord, and in the Battle of Karnak, he used patience and maneuverability when fighting the Necrons, instead of arrogantly bull-rushing in. Eldorath was once again defeated in combat. Yet in this battle, Eldorath learned yet another important lesson of war. Sometimes you're just simply unlucky. And so, we leave our Eldar Farseer, who has learned through his experiences to not let your pride guide you, and perhaps, who knows, maybe one day he'll get the upper hand on the Necrons. So, next week we'll be speaking of a very humble ranger of the Eldar, Ellic Nightspear, who to me is a shining example of what a soldier should be. Well, if you like this Vox, please subscribe, like, comment, and send support for a good robot helper Bob. Remember, he still needs fixing.
And as always, this is Zeckthar, signing off.